Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining this week's episode of the Cart Barn Podcast. I'm Chris Lemley and joined by Gregg Dewalt. This week on the Cart Barn, we have a return guest. Gary Christian joins us to talk about the Ryder Cup. Gary is a unique figure in golf. He's originally from England. He played golf at Wallace State. Then he went to Auburn, and he turned professional in 1998. He had a couple of wins on the Korn Ferry Tour, and Gary now lives in Birmingham. He spends most of his time teaching and also works for the Golf Channel, PGA Tour Live, and Sky Sports as an analyst and commentator. I think Gary's past experience makes him an ideal guest to unpack this year's Ryder Cup.
Yeah, Gary was, we wanted to get Gary on to give us kind of a European perspective on the Ryder Cup and give us some insight onto playing Bethpage Black. He's played it. And a little insight into the different mindset maybe that the European team brings to the Ryder Cup. I think everybody kind of feels like that their team is just so much closer than the American team when they get right down to it. And he also, talked a little bit about growing up in England, wanting to play on the Ryder Cup team, thinking that would be a monumental feather in his cap in his career, and maybe how that differs among the American team members. So we just want to get that perspective. He added a lot of insight actually into maybe the crowd, how a few people or a lot of people were over the top with their insults to the players, and just an interesting conversation with Gary about the whole thing.
Yeah, he brought up several points that I hadn't thought about. I think everyone's going to enjoy this week's episode of the Cart Barn with Gary Christian. Welcome back to the Cart Barn Podcast. Super excited to welcome Gary Christian back into the Cart Barn this week. Gary joined us earlier in the year, and he's joining us again today to talk about the Ryder Cup. Gary, welcome to the Cart Barn.
Well, thanks for having me back. That's I feel like an honored guest now, twice in a year. That's nice.
You're our favorite Euro guest. You're also our only Euro guest. So,
well, that's why I wore the England 3 lions on the chest there. So just to make things even worse for what happened last week.
Well, let's get right in. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, how surprised were you? Not just maybe at the outcome, but how dominant the European side was early on.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, you get the best players in the world and everything kind of falls into place where they're confident, they're swinging freely, they're, just focusing on the hole on the greens, and great things happen. It was unbelievable. The shots that we saw for the first 2 days from the Europeans was, I think, unlike any series of golf shots I've seen in my lifetime. There were so many great shots, so many great approach shots, so many great putts, and then chip ins at the crucial times, and it was phenomenal watching. And then the Americans did something very similar on a Sunday where they basically played error-free golf. And the Europeans played well on Sunday, but the Americans just played an incredible last round and was so close to overcoming the deficit.
Yeah, we covered in the previous podcast that you played in 2012 in the Open with Tiger Woods at Bethpage Black.
Well, it was actually at the Barclays in the FedEx Cup playoffs. I was telling some friends the week or two before. I mean, it's going to be carnage out there because what I experienced watching what he went through, 13 years ago, and society has changed since then, and it's got way worse and way more toxic and way more poisonous. And to see what he went through then, I knew that this Ryder Cup, I hope anyway, it will be a tipping point because everything was unacceptable when I played with him, and the stuff they were saying to him, about his personal life, and we were talking about actually walking down one hole, and I said, do you ever hear what the crowd says? And he says, yeah, I do, but I can't react because I can't make eye contact. I can't do anything because then it becomes about me and it's not about the tournament.
Yeah.
And it just gets out of control. And so he just has to kind of plod down the middle of the fairway. And I think that was one of the reasons he enjoyed kind of, talking with me and my caddy, just to kind of get his mind away from just avoiding having to make eye contact with people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really, really toxic environment then. And as I said, it's different now. Society is different. And, people pay their entrance fee and they think that gives them, free reign to do whatever they want and say whatever they want. So it was, as I said, I hope it's going to go the way of Phoenix did 2 years ago, where it got out of control and the PGA Tour and the tournament, they said, well, we need to make some adjustments here. And I hope it will be the same thing with the Ryder Cup in the US.
Yeah, I don't think that the PGA of America did any favors, or the pre-tournament hype was a lot about the New York crowds and how boisterous they are. Maybe I don't know that it would have made a difference if they had maybe downplayed that aspect, but you see so much these days, the Red Sox Yankees rivalry, the Patriots, the Giants, the Jets, where it's rowdy environments. A little less rhetoric maybe would have helped a little bit, because I think that just encouraged.
Yeah, and it lends itself, football and basketball and baseball lend itself to that kind of environment, because the crowd are, hundreds of feet away from the players, and it doesn't matter if people are saying stuff as someone's trying to pitch or trying to bat or trying to throw a touchdown. But when someone's 10 feet from someone shouting not very nice things before they ever hit the shot, it's just not the environment you need to be doing that in. And it just it was a shame for me, because it took away from what I think was one of the best Ryder Cups ever, where the dominant, unbelievable performance of the Europeans for the first 2 days, and then the incredible performance of the Americans on the final day, I think gets lost a little bit in everything else is what people are talking about and what they're going to remember from the 2025 Ryder Cup. And, obviously when you get an MC revving the crowd up at 7:30 in the morning, giving them license to say those things, there was no shock that it was going to just turn into what it turned into. And it's a real shame. And, I'd like to see, I'm a member of the PGA of America, and I would like to see them come out with something to lead me to believe that it will be different next time when it's in the US.
I hope so, because like you say, it did tarnish the overall experience. I think not just for the people on the grounds and the players, but the viewers as well.
Exactly.
And it becomes a topic of conversation. We shouldn't be talking about that.
The PGA of America is to grow the game. Yeah, the mission statement of the PGA of America is to grow the game. If I had a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old kid, I'm not growing the game, because if I go to that venue and listen to that, I'm going to say, well, golf's not for me. I don't want to be a part of this. This is not the way you grow the game. And so they drop the ball there, but they have an opportunity to I think, to do something to make a strong statement, in addition to the vanilla statements that have been made to this point, and say, hey, look, this was unacceptable, and we need to do better. We need to look at this differently. We need to look at what we say, how we do interviews, whatever it is, just to make it about the golf, not make it about the crowd and the trouble that came as a result of a complete breakdown in everything.
Yeah, I agree. I heard that Fitzpatrick's parents didn't even go back out there on Sundays because they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, it should be the proudest day of your life to watch your son play in a Ryder Cup.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to be out there and listen to what these people are saying about your kid, that just says it all. I mean, that really says it all. And I was so proud of, I've got to know Tom Watson over the years, and I was so proud of the statement that he came out with, that was what everyone should be saying and what the PGA of America should be saying. And I think what every former Ryder Cup captain should be saying. Tom Watson was a former Ryder Cup captain, former player, obviously, and he said exactly what needed to be said. And it's not that complicated. And if you had everyone saying a similar thing, I think it would change things very quickly.
I certainly
Agreed.
hope so moving forward. And since it's a little bit of controversy with that, let's dive into the little bit of controversy with Justin Rose and the caddy incident.
Yeah.
How did you view that?
Well, we would like to say it was a mistake of not knowing who was out. But there is a very, it was the same thing with Joe LaCava the last time, where the caddies don't need to be part of it. As a player, you learn pretty quickly, especially with the veterans, that the caddies need to stay out of things. They don't need to be anywhere where a player is. And so it's just a sort of an unwritten rule. A caddy doesn't get anywhere near a player when a player, even if he doesn't know if it's his turn to play, you can't be anywhere near him. And Justin Rose was very justified to tell him, to get out of his sight, or get out of his line, or get out of his eyesight. And he said himself he could have done it a better way. He could have done it in a more friendly way and a less confrontational way. But he was still in the right to tell him to get out of the way. And what Joe LaCava did a couple of years ago, for someone as experienced as him, he has to know better than that. And you cannot do that. That was ridiculous. And if I was the king of the world, I would have said Joe can't caddy the next day, because that was an unwritten etiquette rule that he broke, and he broke it not just slyly, not just subtly. He made a big deal about doing it on purpose, and I didn't like that one bit.
Should Bryson have kind of told his caddy to get out of the way? Would that have diffused the whole situation?
Yeah, as a player, you have the responsibility. Your caddy is your responsibility. So ultimately, it comes down to the player. How the caddy acts is then reflected on the player. And so if my caddy, when I was playing, did something wrong, that would come back to me in my group and after the round. And so Bryson could have probably said something and said, "Hey, Greg, get out of the way." And then when Justin reacted the way he did, "Hey, make sure you go up and apologize to Justin Rose afterwards." That would have been the correct way to do it. But obviously emotions were high, and we're in the middle of this incredible Ryder Cup, and you don't think straight. So you can see where things didn't go the way it should do. But then to see them walking up and seeing Ted Scott get involved with Molinari, and see Fleetwood saying stuff and try and get between Molinari and Ted Scott. I mean, Ted Scott's one of the most mild-mannered, nicest people on the earth, but even he lost his head in the middle of a Ryder Cup and the frenzy. But I think that's turned on by the crowd. And it ultimately comes back to that, where people make bad decisions, and decisions they would never, ever do in a regular PGA Tour event, because of all of this stuff that's going on outside the ropes. And it's almost like a WWE thing, where it's chaos.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
You don't equivocate golf with testosterone, but there
No,
definitely was a lot of testosterone flowing
oh,
in the
we
Ryder
got
Cup.
a lot of alpha males playing golf, and there's some massive egos out there. And so when you get that, plus the toxic atmosphere, plus playing for your country or playing for your continent, you're just going to get bad things. And we understand that. We understand that the players don't act the way they would normally act, and they act like idiots on the golf course. But it's part of it, and it's part of the show. But it's just all as a result of the Ryder Cup being hyped up and hopped up as much as it is, with everything that goes on around it. So I'm glad it's only once every 2 years. Let's put it that way.
Gary, how significant is the win for Team Europe, especially being away? It's the first away victory, I think, since like 2012.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive win because it's just so hard to win away from home. The home team gets to set up the course, gets to set everything up the way they want to set it up, and they use analytics and data to do it, set it up the best they can. And Keegan Bradley himself said, "Hey, we messed up. We set it up too easy." And that was a little part of it. There's not the advantage like it used to be with setups, because all the Europeans basically on the PGA Tour, so they're used to quick greens, they're used to fast fairways, they're used to relatively receptive greens. And so it's not like it used to be, where it was, a lot of players would play at least half the year on the PGA, on the European Tour, and putt on greens that were fast, slower, with more rough, and you would kind of set up the course to suit it. But there was 11 of the 12 who won in Rome, playing in Europe, so they were a seasoned group. And it's, for me, it was great to see how the players had kind of evolved. When you think about when Robert McIntyre was playing in Rome, it was a feel-good story. It was, wow, this is really cool. This, Scotsman that, we've heard of a little bit, and, he was a good character and we enjoyed watching him. Well, now he's a star in world golf. And so he's evolved over those 2 years to become someone that maybe the Europeans would rely on, to be a kind of a stalwart of the team. But it's just going to make the next Ryder Cup in Ireland that much more spicy, and the Americans are not going to want to get beaten again in Europe. And, they've not had a very good record over there, obviously, over the last 20, 30 years. So once again, everything ratchets up. But, there may be rethinking how they go about things and how they analyze things and how they put teams together. And, it's just, you would like to think you just put good players out and they will play against other good players, and on a day, one team will beat another team another beat another. But there is more to it. The unheralded member of the European team was Eduardo Molinari. He went from an incredible player, I think a former US amateur champion,
Hmm.
a long-time member of the DP World Tour. He still plays, but he has dedicated himself to the analytics and the data. And to be able to have someone like him, who not only understands the data, but can kind of translate it into player speak, as he's a great player, I think he's the most unheralded member of that team. Luke Donald did an incredible job, but Molinari, Eduardo, not Francesco, Eduardo was that that person that certainly Luke has given an incredible amount of credit to.
Well, they've won 9 out of the last 12, so I mean, they're definitely dominating this competition.
Yeah.
Why?
I think I'd like to say it's fairly simple. I don't think you can force chemistry. And I think there's genuine love and camaraderie with the European team. And I always feel like it's forced with the US team. And when you think of the superstars, Scotty Scheffler's going to get his own house, and he's going to have his own team, and he's going to stay apart from everyone else. And they'll see each other in a practice round, they'll see each other at the tournament, may see each other in player dining. But as soon as everything finishes, everyone scurries off to their little private kingdom. You'll find the Europeans, a lot of them live closer to each other, maybe around Jupiter, and they all hang out, and they do stuff together with their families. And I saw Tommy Fleetwood and Justin Rose go on vacation together before, I think it was Memphis, before Tommy and Justin kind of battled on the back nine. It just looks more natural when I see the hugs at the end of a match. I see genuine love and camaraderie. With the Americans, I see kind of that, but I also see kind of a bro hug. And
Yeah,
let's
that's a good point.
let's prove how close we are, and we'll, for 1 week a year, we'll be the best teammates, best friends ever. But then the other 51 years, we're going to do everything we can to avoid each other. And it just doesn't. When you're in a team environment, especially for 3 days under that pressure, eventually, I think the true camaraderie kind of pulls you through when you're kind of struggling. I mean, when you think about Rory McIlroy, Scotty Scheffler played 5 rounds in 3 days. They were gassed in that last round. I mean, they played terrible between them, but it was because of, I think it was because of fatigue and emotions and everything that came with it. They were just drained with every part of their game. But there's that ability to kind of just wring a little extra out of it with your team that you have spent this time with over the years, not just once every 2 years.
When you saw the course set up, were you surprised at the way it was set up compared to when you played?
Oh, I mean, that sign on the first tee truly said it when I got there. I remember playing in the practice round, and I called my wife and said, "It's going to be a short week. I can't play this course. It's way too long. The rough's too high. I'm hitting 6 irons and hybrids in a load of par fours and par threes. There's no chance I can compete." And then, fortunately, on Thursday morning, I woke up and the ball was going 20, 30 yards further because it was rolling. And now all of a sudden, I hit it straight, and I could play that golf course. But when the rough's chopped down and the greens are, it doesn't matter what course you have. When the greens are receptive, it doesn't matter how long the course, how difficult the course is. The best players in the world are absolutely going to flog it. There's no protection. I covered the PGA Championship at Valhalla, 7,600 yards. The ball was basically plug-in when it landed, and they shot 20 under to win a major. Soft courses just it's nothing to a PGA Tour player. And then when you have no rough of any note with the receptive greens, it was always going to be like that way. And it was a shame to me because it took one of the crown jewels of US golf, and especially crown jewels of US golf that everyone has an opportunity to play. And it was just a vanilla golf course. Fortunately, the drama made up for that. But I think there was so much drama because basically every hole was a birdie hole, and I mean maybe that's what they wanted. I don't know, but Keegan said it where he regretted the setup.
I think just watching it from afar, I guess maybe I expected a U.S. Open type setup with long rough and again the fairways were so soft and they were playing preferred lies early on. It was a little disappointing to see him flag hunting on every hole, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much you can do in Mother Nature, and if you have rain and it softens, of course, there's nothing you can do about it. But if there's no rough, then you basically got 40-yard wide fairways, so you can just smash it as hard as you want and not have to worry about anything. So it was a little bit of bomb and gouge. It was a little bit of we were really hoping to see Bethpage Black in its finery and its. It's being such a great course, and we just saw kind of a bland golf course, unfortunately. But you can't argue with the drama, so I guess they got it right in that respect.
It looked like a course that Gary Christian could go shoot 63 on today.
Off the front tees, potentially. If you only hit it 270, it doesn't matter how easy the course is. It ain't going to go well against these boys who are flying at 300. So
that's the truth. Yeah,
I could get it around in par. Let's put it that way. We'll say that.
We have had Stuart Sink on, and he talked about the analytics that go into the pairings and those types of deals. How much do the analytics really play into outcomes or getting the correct pairings? Because
I think in the old days, because you didn't have analytics, there was all just hunches. Okay, he and he play well together or seem to be well matched, and you didn't have to worry about it. But now you have data. They were talking about, the Harris English Colin Morikawa pairing was, of all the potential pairings, was basically the bottom pairing, and they played twice. And so there's no excuse for that because, when you're using data and you put out a pair that are ranked in the sort of the strength of pairing that low, I mean, anyone can figure that out. That wasn't going to go well. So, there is a lot to it now, but there's also the captain's hunch, like in baseball where the coach has a hunch that someone needs to come in out the bullpen because they just feel like this is the right play. There is a little bit of that, but the analytics are important. As I said, Eduardo Molinari, he is the undervalued from the point of the media MVP of the Ryder Cup.
So I want to come back to that question, but you just said something that I did not know, and that was the Morikawa English, they were at the bottom of the cohesiveness.
There was I don't know what it was. There was some sort of equation. I'm sure Greg probably paid attention to it. I was just kind of, you're just flicking through, and they had this big list of potential pairings, and those two were right at the bottom. And then what was surprising, they put them out again the next day. And so, there's no excuse for that. If you're using data, if you're not using data, then fine, don't worry about it. But if you say you're using some sort of data, then you would think that would be something that you would pay attention to.
So the reason that I asked that question is because, as Greg alluded to, when Stewart was on, he was a co-captain or vice captain in the President's Cup, this last President's Cup, and he shared with us on the podcast that the ranking by Scout, and there's another company that does all this data, and I know that Scout was also there at the President's Cup. The number one pairing never happened. And the number one pairing for the U.S. team in the President's Cup, if I remember correctly, was Tony Finau and Russell Henley. And that they matched up the best. They were in the upper 90 percentile.
Mm.
And he said the reason that pairing never took place is because Tony plays the least spinniest golf ball on tour.
Yeah.
And Russell plays the most.
Yeah, exactly.
Russell needs the spin to get the ball up in the air. Tony obviously does not. And they just didn't feel like, and I think they might have even tested a little bit. They just that was not gonna happen in alternate shot.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I get frustrated with data and analytics. It doesn't always show the context, and so the data would say you hit it as close to the green as you can off the tee. Well, that's great if the flag's not cut over the edge of a bunker. Then obviously you need to lay back because you need more spin to be able to hold the green. And so there's also a data that you don't try and just miss it on one side, because they show data of whoever misses it 50-50, some on the left, some on the right, about the same. But they say all they try and do is take out one side of the golf course. Well, that's the headline, but the context is, if I try and avoid missing it left all the time, but I've got an out of bounds and a lake down the right, I'm going to miss it left because I can't miss it right. So that's why the data isn't always the context.
Sure.
The context isn't always there. But so you go on all the strokes gained and all the strengths and weaknesses of each player, and you come up with that pairing. But then, as you say, the context is, well, they're using two completely different balls, and we can't do that because both of them are going to struggle. So you always have to look at the context in addition to the data.
Absolutely agree 100%. I guess the reason I brought that up is, if that pairing that you referenced was the least, and yet they played twice, and in the President's Cup, the best pairing on paper never happened because of the ball. I just find that very interesting that Keegan, as the captain, made that choice. That's
I mean, and it's not really one I've heard an explanation for. That's the curious thing. So I'd love to get the explanation of why. And sometimes the captain has a hunch of, man, these guys in the room were just they were so pissed that they lost, and man, just give me the ball, let me play tomorrow, I'll guarantee I'll get you a point. Sometimes it's as simple as that, and the captain has no choice and says, okay, go out there, and it's great if you win, not so good if you lose.
So going back to Molinari, and you used the word MVP, explain that a little bit more. How is his understanding of this data contributing that much?
Yeah, so most top players have data guys, and they're usually computer wizards, and they can punch all the stuff in. I was talking to, I believe it was Billy Horschel, and he was talking about he didn't like TPC Los Colinas, but his data guy said, hey, this is a perfect golf course for you, and said, go play. And he finished fourth. And, the data guy won the day. But you get a lot of guys who have analyzed the data who, maybe they're master's is in statistics or something like that. Well, they've never played the game before, and so the numbers to them never lie. But if you have that understanding, and then you're a player, and you can translate all the numbers and take out maybe some things that you could take out because you're a player and you understand, then all of a sudden those numbers and that data becomes way more powerful. And that, I think, is why Eduardo was so useful, because he could disseminate the information and disseminate it to a player's perspective and prove why.
Makes sense. Sounds like we're talking Moneyball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he did the same the previous Ryder Cup, and
Yeah.
and Luke gave him a lot of credit there as well.
Yeah.
And so I would love, if I ever had a podcast or the ability to interview someone, I'd love to sit down with Eduardo, and talk about that, and talk about how, why, where, if there's hunches involved on top of the data, whatever it is, or if it's all 100% data driven.
That's interesting. Greg, you back?
When there's been I'm back. Sorry for leaving y'all for a minute, but technology is undefeated, I guess. Right. When you get down to blame, Keegan's getting all kinds of blame for this defeat. Then there's also the PGA of America's gotten some criticism about they need to change the process. Doesn't it just come down to players playing, and the guys playing better are gonna win?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's weird when when the team plays great, the captain gets so much credit, and when the team gets outplayed, the losing captain gets so much blame. There is, the captains obviously have a big role, but ultimately, as you say, it comes down to the quality of the play, and the ability to perform down the stretch for the last few holes and turn losses into halves or losses into wins. And you can't legislate that. You can pull as hard as you want as a captain, and once you've made those pairings, there's really not much else you can do apart from a little bit of information out there. But Keegan, it was just a weird choice, wasn't it? Where the Europeans kind of have a line of succession of, you kind of pay your dues as a player, and then you kind of get on there maybe as a vice captain, and you're around the team, and you're around everything that goes on with the setup of the Ryder Cup, and basically Keegan was an outsider. And he basically said it himself, hey, the only way I'm going to get to play on the Ryder Cup is to qualify automatically. I'm not going to get a pick. I'm not one of the in guys. And so it was a curious choice. I don't know how much of that was driven from Netflix, the Full Swing episode, where it was just as someone who's been around the game, I've never seen a more powerful episode. Watching that phone call that Zach Johnson made to Keegan Bradley, and seeing someone's spirit crushed, and then everyone kind of pulling for Keegan, and then maybe that was what caused the PGA to pick him as the next captain. I don't know, but it just didn't seem like maybe it was that out of the box choice of a captain that sometimes works great. It's a completely different look. It's a completely different angle from a captain's perspective. And they may have had a hunch like we were talking about, and it ultimately didn't pay off. I think he's a good captain. I think the players really liked him. But he gave the Europeans a lot of bulletin board fodder. They had that quote of his from Netflix about kicking their ass at Bethpage right in their team room, and they looked at that every moment they had an opportunity. And so you saw how Luke Donald was almost like a politician. He never gave anyone anything to use as bulletin board material, and when he did, it was kind of clever. Talking about the money in the opening speech, and basically the players would play for nothing for the European team, and didn't talk about the Americans and the money situation personally, but it was intimated and everyone knew what he was talking about. So he was very, very clever, where he just got, those little digs in without being too obvious about it. And, he just played it. He played it perfectly. And There is that line of succession, and you look at the European team, and it's a shame what Liv's done, because obviously Poulter, obviously Westwood would probably have been captains in the next few Ryder Cups, and I don't know if that's ever going to change and those bridges are going to be mended. But it was great to see Tyrrell Hatton and John Rahm be such a big part of the team, and be an integral part of it. So you never know. The Ryder Cup may begin the healing. Who knows? I hope so. But you look at that team, and you look at Justin Rose. Obviously, will be a surefire captain. You look at the other players who have played a number of Ryder Cups that you would kind of almost say, this year would be this person, this year would be that person. So they got a really good setup there. They got a good system and a successful system.
Yeah, absolutely they do. And back to Luke Donald's comments, I thought they were, in his opening remarks, very smooth and very rich.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about this pay for play?
Yeah, I mean, in my understanding, the players have always had a charitable deduction made in their name. Always had it. And so, if you say you're not going to take the money and you're going to give it to charity, and you're already getting a charitable thing, well, I don't see what the point was of bringing that up, that we need to get a piece of the action if you're going to give it away. And so it just made another unnecessary gaffe for the US team to just have that as part of it. And when these people watching the Ryder Cup see a bunch of multimillionaires complaining that they're not getting paid to play for their country, there was always going to be a little bit of second guessing, and just when the Europeans were so adamant, I will pay to play on the Ryder Cup team. This is everything to me.
Yeah.
The thought of me making money on this is ridiculous. And I understand the economics of it. The PGA of America make a load of money, and I could see where you would want to demand a part of the cut, but sometimes you got to read the room, and I don't think they read the room very well, and then it kind of all just sort of went the wrong way when they had to feel like they had to give it away to charity anyway, which they were already going to do with a donation for the PGA of America. I played junior college golf with Brett Wetterick, and I think when he played in the Ryder Cup, I think in his name, I think Wallace State Community College was given $100,000 from the PGA of America for his participation in the Ryder Cup. So it's just weird. It's strange. I don't get it. I mean, I would give my right leg to play for the European team in the Ryder Cup. So not that I'll be very good with one leg.
I think
I understand that sentiment, though.
the other kind of, not controversy but topic of discussion, was the envelope rule. It got some criticism there. Why should a team get half a point when your guy can't play? I kind of go back to the whole Ryder Cup thing was kind of a gentleman's match. It wasn't cutthroat, and that's where that rule evolved from. And now a lot of people are jumping on the rule. Are you happy with the rule, or should it be changed, or should you have a replacement player ready? Or
I think it's the worst situation that you can have, where if your team's got a healthy lead, you can maybe have 3 or 4 players theoretically say I'm injured. Obviously, Steve Pate had an issue back in the 90s, and they had to use that rule there. I think there was someone else had to use that rule, Sam Torrance. But again, Luke Donald again played it beautifully. Was asked that question in the press conference, and he said, "Hey, look, we agreed to this contract before the Ryder Cup. These are all the rules, and this is what we've agreed to. We both signed this contract." He didn't say whether it was right or wrong. He just said, "Hey, look, we agreed to this, and maybe this Ryder Cup will say, hey, in the future, this is not going to be the rule, and we're not going to sign these contracts if this is in there." That's fine with me. But it's a cliche, but it is what it is. It was in the contract. They agreed on it beforehand, and they implemented that rule.
Would you change it now?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a silly rule, but
Yeah.
if both teams were agree on it before, you can't change the rules halfway through because
Indeed.
you're losing. Yeah.
And like you mentioned, I mean, it's rarely come into play. So
Mm.
I think for me, the solution would be just to have a replacement player on site.
Yeah.
You know, because you do feel sorry for Harris English, who didn't get to play a singles
Yeah.
match. But yeah, I think the replacement player would be the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. It shouldn't be that complicated. And, but I'm surprised that no one's ever thought of that before. You got 2 years to figure it out. I'm surprised in the 2 years before this Ryder Cup, they didn't say, hey, this rule's dumb. Why are we signing this? Why don't we have come to an agreement between the two teams to have a replacement player? It seems like that's just so easy to do, especially when there's so much interest in who makes the team, who misses out on the team. Wouldn't it be great to be an alternate for the Ryder Cup and be part of the team and be sitting there on the sidelines just in case?
It would have been a great out for Keegan to get to play. He could have named himself as the
Yeah,
replacement player.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I guess there's so much second guessing on that of not putting himself in the team, and it's just that's the beauty of the Ryder Cup. Let's take out all of the terrible stuff that went on outside the ropes.
Mm.
Every Ryder Cup, there's so much second guessing. What if we'd have done this? What if we'd done that? What if Keegan had picked himself? What if he'd have given the captaincy to someone else? Who knows what would have happened? But that's the beauty of sports and second guessing, isn't it?
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah, I think hopefully it will be remembered for, like you mentioned earlier, the Euros tremendous play the first 2 days, and then
Mm.
A finish for the ages, and Shane Lowry making a putt that
Yeah,
Chris and I mentioned earlier. I don't know what happens if Shane misses that putt, or if Russell Henley drains it before him. How
yeah.
those
Oh,
last few
exactly.
matches go, but it was it was
Yeah,
just, again, it was great theater. Aside from the fans and a few fans,
yeah,
I don't want to group every fan into that,
yeah,
but just the
yeah,
boisterous few.
yeah. The thing that made me sad was, I think, let's say 20, it's definitely 30 years ago, if someone has said something like that, or something that was going on constantly, the rest of the crowd would have told them to be quiet, or they would have probably knocked their lights out. And
Yeah.
now it's you need one idiot, then leads to a load of idiots
Yeah.
joining in. And I think that's the change, and that's societal. It's the golf audience has changed completely. The Europeans that come over to support their team are mostly golfers. They understand the game, they love the game, they play the game, and maybe a lot of the people who turned up this week were just there for the show, to say they were at the Ryder Cup and to say that here's my Instagram picture of me at the Ryder Cup shouting at Rory. It's just a shame the way it's gone. And I didn't know if the reason they charged $750 was to keep the riffraff out. It didn't work. It didn't work charging $15 a beer. So I don't know how they're going to do it, but they have to make things different next time in how that they police outside the ropes, to make sure that the story of the Ryder Cup is the play and the players, and not the crowd. Now, hopefully, we're in Minnesota next time. They're very nice up there in the Midwest. Hopefully it's a better quality. We'll see.
I hope so. And it doesn't help that you've got 4 matches out on a course early, and all the crowd is around those 4 matches.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah,
fans are not
exactly.
that spread out. Wow.
Yeah,
But yeah, I hope it's remembered for the good finish, the quality of the play, which was tremendous. We haven't even talked much about the shot after shot after shot that somebody
yeah,
would hit it in 5 feet, and somebody else would come right
yeah,
behind him and hit him the 2 feet. And uh,
yeah.
John Rahm's chip in, that was the shot I think I'll remember the most, outside of
That
Shane
was
Lowry
incredible.
making the putt, was his chip in.
Exactly. Yeah, when I was just starting in golf, the Ryder Cup was such a big deal, and I remember I had a video of the '87 Ryder Cup at Muirfield Village, and I just watched that and rewatched it, and I dreamt of playing in the Ryder Cup as a result of watching that video, and I just remember it was similar quality of play there, especially in the four ball on the Saturday afternoon. I think it was just shot after shot after shot was just rifle straight at the flag, and people making birdies left, right, and center. And it was just, it gave me vibes of that, of just people taking dead aim. And when you see these great players playing, free, where they're not thinking of what if I miss, they're just taking dead aim. And you see that's why they hit these incredible iron shots, and then that's why they make it. It feels like every 15-footer. I've never seen so many 15-footers made. The make rate on the PGA Tour from 15 feet is about 25%, something like that. It felt like they made 75% of them. But that's what happens when the elite athlete, their mind is just 100% on the target, and then just letting it go and not worrying about anything else. And I think that's the frustration with a lot of these players. Why can't I do this in a regular PGA Tour event every single week? I've got the secret right here. I'm doing these incredible things. To watch Justin Rose make putt after putt after putt at 45 years old. And I think he said it in the press conference, he just wishes he could tap into this when he's playing every single week. But, it's an incredible spectacle. And just going back to that 87 Ryder Cup, I think a big part of that, again, is a little bit cultural, where, I've lived in America 30 odd years, and obviously it's sort of the rugged individualism is what we revere and what we put on a pedestal. And so, when I was playing professionally, I always felt like every single player, every single American player on the PGA Tour just thought, man, I can win a major. I can do this. I can do anything I put my mind to. And it may not be realistic, but it's kind of, that was their mindset. And I think as a European growing up, obviously I knew, I wasn't a great player, but I thought, man, maybe if I could make it to the PGA Tour or the European Tour, maybe I could just have one of those years and make the Ryder Cup and be one of the top 12 in Europe, not the number one player in a major. And I think there was a little bit more of that realistic thinking where, there's maybe a number of those players on the European team who will say, yeah, obviously I can win a bunch of majors, but maybe deep down they don't 100% believe that. So maybe the Ryder Cup is their major. And for them to be on a winning Ryder Cup team is like winning a major. And it's that realistic achievement that they can, at the end of their career, say, I achieved my goal. And it's hard to win a major. There's not many of them in your career, and you're playing against a load of great players, but you can be one of 12 that can do something spectacular like we've just seen here. So those 12 will end up being heroes that will be remembered for 20, 30, 40 years. And, when you think of Højgaard, where he comes from, and Victor Hovland, where he comes from, they will be put on a pedestal for life of representing their country and achieving something great, just the same way as Hideki Matsuyama winning the Masters. He's bigger in Japan than Tiger is in the US, because it was just an achievement that, it captured a nation, and it captured everyone's imagination over there.
That's some really great perspective that you've provided, Gary. A lot of interesting comments, and just even keel. I didn't expect you to come out with a flag wrapped around you, but
well, I was hot and sweaty coming off the golf course, and I felt at least I should change shirts, and it just so happened that was the one I saw in my drawer.
No worries.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chris,
which player surprised you the most this week, either good or bad?
There was something about Justin Thomas that surprised me in a good way in that last round, to be able to hit the shots that he hit down the stretch, and more importantly, make the putts, because he's struggled a little bit with the putting over the years, the last few years in particular. But he looked like the world-class player that he is. That when I saw him playing down the stretch, I thought, well, there's no reason that Justin Thomas can't go win 3 or 4 more majors, because to hit the shots that he hit under pressure when he absolutely needed it to, I thought was something pretty special. Tommy Fleetwood, to me, surprised me. He shouldn't have surprised me, but obviously his record in the Ryder Cup is just, I mean, it's unbelievable, isn't it? Especially in the team part of the Ryder Cup, basically undefeated. And I think that win in the FedEx Cup playoffs, I think just elevated him internally to finally believe it. He's always said he believes it, and he did believe it. But sometimes you've got to get a win just to justify that and validate it. And he just,
Yeah.
I think this experience of him, having, having a little bit of pressure on him like he did, to perform as someone who's just done as well as he's done in the FedEx Cup playoffs, and then to back it up with the performance, and most importantly, hit the shots when he needed to, make the putts when he needed to. It was phenomenal. And again, someone you think now he's got that first PGA Tour win out of the way. How many does that lead to? Does that lead to 5 to 10 by the end of his career? I think there's every chance that that's the case. But does that also lead to a couple, 3 majors as well? And I think maybe an experience like this would certainly lend itself to that. As disappointments, maybe just players had poor weeks. Russell Henley, number 3 in the world, didn't play like a number 3 player in the world. You got they made so much of the big guns have got to perform. So
Yeah.
Bryson, Scotty Scheffler didn't perform the way that they would have expected to for points. But with the number 3 player in the world, you would have expected him to have played probably 5 matches and maybe taken 2.5, 3 points at a bare minimum, and he didn't either. And then obviously, had opportunities to close out his match in the final day and didn't. So, I think that will be a tough one for him where, he's had an incredible year. I mean, just an incredible year of consistent performance, and sometimes, the expectations maybe got very, very high, and he didn't live up to them. And that's going to be a tough one for him. I'll be really interested to see how he bounces back from that, whether he'll play in the FedEx Cup fall series, maybe a few events, some great locations. There's some in the south, and the Sea Island would be a great place for him to go. And I'll be really interested to see how he finishes the year if he plays anymore.
I think mentioning Tommy Fleetwood's performance, his win in the FedEx, that could, as you mentioned, just really buoy him towards a great next part of his career. But being a journalist, one of the tired storylines, I think, is people's records in the Ryder Cup, or this guy's never won a major. Monty was saddled with that. Rory was saddled with, will he ever win the career Grand Slam? I think those are a little bit, they're easy storylines for people, but I think they're tired because, it's not easy to win majors. It's not easy. There's only 4 of them every year, so doesn't mean you're a terrible player because you don't win a major.
Right.
I like to see different storylines, but again, they're easy storylines. Tiger's record in the Ryder Cup. It's just it doesn't do much for me when I hear those storylines.
Yeah.
Probably a good place. Me on my soapbox.
I like that soapbox. That was impressive. Very, very nice.
I'm always looking for different angles, but so anyway, I think that's a good place to kind of leave this year's Ryder Cup in the past and look forward for 2 years.
Yeah. What I would like to say, though, again, I go back to the Live PGA Tour schism. To see Bryson, the popularity of Bryson, to see the popularity of John Rahm, I think they just relished that atmosphere and that event and the size of it, and the worldwide appeal that they maybe wouldn't get week to week on the Live Tour. And you just hope and wish and pray that they're going to figure out a way to get these guys playing against each other week to week, because it's box office. I was at the PGA this year at Quail Hollow, and with Rahm and Bryson making a charge on that last round, the crowds were the biggest crowds. They had the biggest crowds coming down the stretch, and they're playing against Scotty Scheffler, number 1 player in the world, who dominate the PGA Tour. So, I would love to see somehow. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know who's going to be the glue, but to see those guys play week to week, this is another reason it made it so special, and to see those guys just going head to head and looking like they're part of the team. John Rahm, he was an integral part of that team. There was no standing off to the side. He was in the middle of everything. And Bryson, his performance, especially in that last day, to come back from the way he came back, it was spectacular. And just the energy of the crowd when Bryson started to chip away at that lead. I mean, it was, to me, that was kind of the turning point in that last round, to see an easy European point little by little by little get chipped away, and then the noise of the crowd and the energy just picked up, and he did everything he could to bolster that even more by charging up to the tee and striding off down to the green and pumping everyone up and raising his arms. That was great, and that's what you want to see with the players. You want to see that. You don't need the bad stuff. That's fine, and the European players would have loved watching that as well, and they didn't think there was anything wrong with that. So these players, they have thick skins, and they understand that it's about the show and it's about entertaining, and if we are pumping up the crowd and we're raising our fists and we're acting like idiots on the green, that's fine. That's all part of it. They didn't have a problem with that. It was just the way the crowd reacted to it and not understanding kind of what should be an expectation.
Yeah. Well
Exactly.
said, and agree 100%.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for joining us, carving a little bit of time out of your post game match today at Inverness.
My pleasure.
No, thanks again, Gary.
No,
We
thanks a lot.
appreciate it. As always, very insightful, and appreciate you spending a few minutes with us on the Cart Barn.
Not a problem. Enjoyed it, fellas. We'll do it again soon.
Perfect.
Okay, we want to thank Gary Christian again. He's become our second timer on the Cart Barn. He always has some good stuff for us. And I thought this week, he really did add some very insightful commentary about the Ryder Cup and its future. And I thought interesting about he's ready to get rid of the envelope rule. I think like everybody is. So we'll see what happens with that. But again, thanks to Gary Christian for joining us this week, Chris.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. We appreciate you tuning in and listening each week. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. It would help us out. And if you're not, go there and do that for us. So thanks again for listening. Catch us again next week on the Cart Barn Podcast.